History is often written in ink, but the true turning points of the world are written in blood and silence. We are told that the timeline of the Great Pirate era is fixed, a river flowing in one direction, guided by the hands of fate and the will of the heavens. But the river of time is treacherous. It possesses currents that run deep beneath the surface, where the pressure of a single man's heart can crack the bedrock of destiny. We remember the summit of the war. We remember the fire, the magma, and the hole punched through the chest of the Pirate King's son. We remember the scream of a rubber boy that shattered the sky. And we remember the hero of the Marines, Monkey D. Garp, walking toward the killer with the slow, terrifying cadence of an approaching storm. In the history we know, the Golden Buddha, Sengoku, slammed the hero into the dust, holding back the rage of a grandfather to preserve the face of justice. But what if the Buddha was too slow? What if the grief of the hero was heavier than the golden palm of a fleet admiral? What happens when the strongest Marine in history decides that family is worth more than the coat on his back? This is not a story of victory. It is a story of a world that broke because a grandfather's love refused to be contained. Before we set sail across this altered sea of fate, join our voyage. So these stories of what might have been are never lost to time. The bead hit the stone with a sound louder than the cannons. It was a small, insignificant noise, the click of a wooden necklace shattering, the red string snapping, but it cut through the roar of Marineford like a guillotine blade. In the center of the plaza, time seemed to stumble and fall. The boy made of fire lay broken in the arms of the boy made of rubber, his vivre card burning away into gray ash that danced on the updraft of the heat. For Monkey D. Garp, the world did not turn gray, it turned red. He sat upon the execution platform, the seat of the greatest power in the world, wearing the coat of absolute justice. For decades, that coat had felt like armor, a symbol of the order he brought to a chaotic sea. But in this moment, looking down at the smoking hole in the chest of the child he had hidden in the mountains, the coat felt like a shroud. It felt like a lie. The laughter of Gold D. Roger echoed in the back of his mind, not mocking but mournful. Protect him, Garp. A child doesn't bear the sins of his father. He had failed. The word was a physical weight crushing his lungs. He had chosen duty. He had chosen to sit still while the executioners raised their blades. He had chosen to weep while they fought. But seeing the magma dripping from Sakazuki's fist, the molten blood of his grandson sizzling on the pavement, something ancient and terrible awoke in the pit of Garp's stomach. The chain of loyalty forged over 50 years of service to the world government was strong. It was made of iron will and history. But the love of a grandfather is made of something stronger than iron. It is made of bone and blood, and it does not bend. Garp stood up. The movement was subtle, but the air around him grew heavy, condensing into a suffocating pressure. Beside him, Fleet Admiral Sengoku felt it instantly. It was the pressure of a sleeping dragon opening its eyes. The Golden Buddha turned, his eyes widening behind his round glasses, seeing not the hero of the Marines, but a man unraveling. "Garp!" Sengoku shouted, his voice laced with a panic that had never touched him before. "Control yourself. Do not do this." Garp stepped off the platform. He did not jump. He simply walked into the air, gravity bending to accommodate his rage. He landed on the dusty plaza floor with a thud that shook the foundations of the island. His head was down. His fists were clenched so tight the skin was white, the veins throbbing like black cords against his aging skin. Sengoku moved. He had to. He was the guardian of this era, the dam holding back the flood. He leaped from the platform, his body swelling, turning into the colossal, blinding majesty of the Golden Buddha. "I will not let you destroy everything we have built," Sengoku roared, crashing down onto Garp, his massive golden palm slamming into the hero's back to pin him to the earth. In the history etched by the victors, this is where it ended. Garp cried out, begging Sengoku to hold him down because if he didn't, he would murder Sakazuki. But in this history, the grief was too vast to be pinned. Sengoku, Garp whispered, his voice a low grind of tectonic plates. The haki erupted. It was not the refined, kingly ambition of the conquerors who sought to rule. It was the raw, destructive force of a natural disaster. The ground beneath them shattered into dust. Sengoku's golden palm cracked. The shock wave blasted outward, knocking Marines and pirates alike off their feet. "Get your hands off me." With a roar that tore his own throat, Garp twisted. He didn't use technique. He used pure, unadulterated power. He threw the fleet admiral, the golden Buddha in his full weight, off of his back as if he were shrugging off a winter coat. Sengoku crashed into the remnants of the execution platform, the gold flickering out of existence as the breath left his body. Garp was free. And 20 yards away, Akainu stood over the weeping form of Straw Hat Luffy, his fist raised for a second kill. The Admiral, the red dog, paused. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up, a primal instinct that predated his Logia powers. He turned slowly, the magma bubbling around his shoulders, his face set in a sneer of absolute righteousness. He saw the old man walking toward him. He saw the tears streaming down a face contorted by a rage so pure it looked like madness. "You intend to stand in the way of justice, Garp?" Akainu sneered, though his voice lacked its usual conviction. "You are a Marine. Remember your place." Garp did not speak. He did not speed up. He merely closed the distance, his right fist turning obsidian black, a darkness so deep it seemed to absorb the light of the sun. The air around his fist distorted, crackling with red lightning. Akainu reacted on instinct. "Hellhound!" he screamed, thrusting a claw of molten rock toward the approaching legend. The magma met the haki. There was no contest. Garp's fist didn't just break the magma, it shattered the concept of the element. He punched through the molten rock, the haki protecting his skin, and continued forward without breaking stride. His fist connected with the side of Akainu's head. The sound was sickening. It was the sound of a mountain collapsing. The Admiral's head snapped to the side, his body lifting off the ground, spinning violently in the air before crashing into the plaza stones. The earth ruptured, a crater forming instantly around the impact. Silence claimed the battlefield. Whitebeard froze. The three admirals froze. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Akainu, dazed, blood pouring from his ear, tried to rise. He was a monster of endurance, a man of absolute will. "You, traitor," he gurgled, magma flaring in his hand to strike back. Garp stood over him. The hero looked down, and for the first time, the world saw the demon that Roger had fought across the seas. "I have no family left to save," Garp said, his voice dead, "so I have no reason left to hold back." He raised his fist a second time. The second strike did not look like a technique. It did not carry a name like Galaxy Impact or Blue Hole. It was a motion stripped of all martial art, reduced to the primitive, terrifying geometry of execution. It was a hammer falling on a nail. Akainu, the man who believed himself to be the absolute embodiment of the world's order, looked up. In that fraction of a second, the magma in his veins went cold. He saw the face of Monkey D. Garp, but there was no humanity left in the eyes, only a bottomless, gray grief that swallowed the light. The Admiral tried to shout, tried to turn his body into the fluid intangibility of the Logia, but the haki radiating from Garp locked him in place. It was a spiritual weight that pinned his very soul to the stones. The fist connected. The impact was not an explosion. It was an implosion. The plaza of Marineford buckled, the stone waves rippling outward like water. A concussive blast of air shot straight up into the sky, parting the clouds and revealing the cold, indifferent blue of the heavens. Akainu did not scream. He simply ceased to be a combatant. His head was driven into the bedrock, the force of the blow shattering the tectonic plate of the island. The Admiral's body twitched once, a violent, spasming rejection of death, and then lay still. The magma ceased to flow. The red heat turned to cooling, jagged stone. Sakazuki, the red dog, was dead. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a silence heavier than the ocean. Thousands of men stood with weapons raised, freezing in the tableau of war. The pirates stopped running. The Marines stopped chasing. Even the Whitebeard pirates, hardened veterans of the New World, stared in disbelief. They had come to war against the Navy, but they had never expected the Navy to eat itself. Garp stood slowly. His fist was dripping, not with blood, but with the crushed essence of the man he had just unmade. He breathed out, a long, shuddering exhale that sounded like a dying gale. The white coat of the Marine Vice Admiral, the coat that said justice on the back in bold, unwavering calligraphy, slipped from his shoulders. It landed in the dust, staining red in the pooling blood of the Admiral. He did not pick it up. Garp! The voice was weak, trembling. Sengoku pulled himself from the wreckage of the platform, blood trickling down his forehead. The Golden Buddha looked at the corpse of his subordinate, then at his oldest friend. There was no anger in Sengoku's eyes, only a horror so profound it bordered on pity. "What have you done?" Garp looked at his hands. The black hockey faded, leaving his skin wrinkled and scarred. He looked old. Suddenly. Terribly old. "I did what I should have done 20 years ago," Garp murmured, his voice carrying across the silent plaza. "I chose my family." He turned his back on the corpse. He turned his back on the horrified stares of Aokiji and Kizaru, who stood paralyzed, uncertain if they should attack the hero of the Marines or flee from him. Garp's eyes scanned the battlefield until they found the small, broken figure being carried by the fishman Jinbei. Luffy was unconscious, his mind shattered by the loss of his brother, oblivious to the fact that his grandfather had just shattered the world for him. Garp took a step toward them, and 1,000 Marines flinched. But he stopped. He looked at Whitebeard, who stood on the Moby Dick, clutching his chest, his body failing him. The two legends of the old era locked eyes across the field of corpses. Whitebeard did not smile. He did not laugh. He simply nodded, a slow, grave acknowledgement of a father who had failed to a grandfather who had broken. "Go," Garp said to the pirates. The command was soft, but it held the authority of a storm. "Take the boy and go." "Vice Admiral Garp!" a Marine captain shouted, his voice cracking with hysteria. "You are letting them escape. You just killed an admiral. You are a traitor to justice." Garp turned his head slowly to look at the shouting man. The captain dropped his sword, the clatter loud in the quiet. "Justice?" Garp asked, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. He looked down at the body of Ace, still lying on the scorched pavement, and then at the crushed form of Akainu. Justice couldn't save a single damn thing. He sat down. Right there in the middle of the war, amidst the fires and the blood, the hero of the Marines sat cross-legged on the ground. He placed his hands on his knees and closed his eyes. He was not fighting anymore. He was waiting. Sengoku stood up, the golden light of the Buddha fading entirely, leaving him looking just as tired and broken as Garp. He signaled to the remaining admirals. His hand shook as he gave the order, the hardest order of his life. "Arrest him," Sengoku whispered. The words felt like treason. "Arrest Monkey D. Garp." The chains rattled as they were brought forward. The war was technically over, but the era of the Marines had just died on the plaza floor. The hero offered his wrists without resistance, the iron cuffs clicking shut with a sound that signaled the end of the age of heroes. The elevator to level 6 of Impel Down does not creak. It descends in a silence so profound that a man can hear the blood rushing in his own ears, whispering the secrets he has kept hidden for a lifetime. For Monkey D. Garp, the descent was familiar. He had ridden this cage of iron and sea stone many times, usually standing tall with his arms crossed, descending to mock a legend or bury a threat. Now he sat on the floor, the heavy chains draped across his chest like garlands of rusted iron. The darkness of the eternal hell was not merely an absence of light. It was a physical weight, the crushing pressure of the ocean floor pressing against the soul. When the gates opened, The shadows recoiled, not from the dim lantern held by the warden, but from the presence of the prisoner. The other inmates, legends erased from history, monsters who had once terrified the seas, did not jeer. They did not rattle their bars. They pressed themselves against the back walls of their cells, watching with the wide, terrified eyes of children witnessing a god fall from the sky. They put him in the deepest cell, the one where the dampness tasted of salt and regret. The door clanged shut, a final note in the funeral dirge of his career. Days turned into weeks, though time in the dark is a meaningless construct. Garp did not eat. He did not sleep. He sat in the lotus position, breathing in the rhythm of the tides he could feel vibrating through the stone. He was not suffering. In the silence, for the first time in decades, the noise of justice had stopped screaming in his mind. He could finally hear the sound of the wind on Dawn Island. He could hear the laughter of 3 boys clinking sake cups in the forest. Then came the footsteps. They were heavy, measured, and weary. They were the footsteps of a man carrying the weight of a collapsing institution. Sengoku the Buddha stood before the bars. He wore no coat. His hair, once a proud afro of black, had turned completely white in the span of a single month. He looked like a statue left out in the rain for 1,000 years. "They are calling it the incident of the broken fist," Sengoku said softly, his voice echoing in the stone chamber. "The world government is trying to bury it. They say Akainu died of wounds from Whitebeard. They say you retired due to grief." Garp opened one eye. It shone in the darkness, clear and unclouded. "Lies are the mortar that holds your fortress together, Sengoku. Why should this be any different?" Sengoku gripped the bars, his knuckles turning white. "You didn't just kill a man, Garp. You killed the ideal." The Marines are in chaos. Half the rank and file look at their superiors and wonder if they are monsters. The other half are terrified to act, paralyzed by the thought that the hero might judge them next. "You have turned the Navy into a ship without a rudder." "I turned it into a ship with a conscience," Garp replied, his voice gravelly but steady. He shifted, the chains rattling like wind chimes. "For too long we called it justice whenever we crushed a dream or executed a bloodline. We told ourselves it was for the greater good, but I looked at that platform, Sengoku. I saw the son of the Pirate King, and I saw my grandson, and I realized absolute justice is just a fancy word for absolute cruelty." Sengoku lowered his head. He could not argue. He too had held Garp down. He too had watched the tragedy unfold and done nothing until the dam broke. "I am resigning," Sengoku whispered. "I recommended Aokiji to take my place, but the world government, the 5 elders, they are afraid. They want control. They are pushing for a draft. They want to fill the void of Akainu with pure power, regardless of morality." "Let them try," Garp grunted, closing his eye again. "The seed is already planted. You can't pave over the ocean, old friend." Far away from the damp dark of Impel Down, the world was indeed changing. The wind was howling in the new world, but it was strongest in the hidden corners where the revolutionaries gathered. On the island of Baltigo, the white soil swirled in the gale. Monkey D. Dragon stood on the cliffside clutching a newspaper that had been smuggled out of the chaos. The headline was a lie. "Hero retires. Admiral falls in battle." But Dragon knew the truth. His spies had seen the fist that broke the sky. For years, Dragon had looked at the Marines with contempt, seeing them as nothing more than dogs of the celestial dragons. He had looked at his father with a mix of anger and pity. A man strong enough to change the world, but too chained by duty to try. "He finally did it," Dragon murmured, the wind whipping his cloak. Sabo, his memory still a fractured puzzle, stood beside him, feeling a phantom pain in his chest that he couldn't explain. "Who?" "The man who taught me that a fist is only as strong as the heart behind it," Dragon said, a rare, terrifying smile touching his lips. "The Marines have lost their souls, Sabo. They have the weapons, they have the numbers, but they have lost the narrative. The hero chose family over the government. That story will burn down the world faster than any flame." The gray terminal, The place where society threw away what it didn't want was no longer just a trash heap in the Goa kingdom. It was now the state of the world itself. The clear lines between good Marine and bad pirate had been smeared into gray ash. Young Marines, boys who had joined to be like Garp, were now deserting in the night, unable to reconcile the death of their idol's career with the justice they were sworn to uphold. Pirates, seeing the fracture, grew bolder, not out of greed, but out of a strange, newfound righteousness. If the law was broken by its greatest enforcer, then what value did the law hold? Back in the cell, the darkness seemed to thicken. Sengoku turned to leave, his silhouette framed by the dim light of the corridor. "Will you rot here, Garp?" Sengoku asked, his voice cracking. "Is this how the legend ends, eaten by the dark?" Garp laughed. It was a small, dry sound, but it carried the warmth of a hearth fire. "I am not rotting, Sengoku," Garp said, leaning his head back against the cold stone. "I am waiting. The era is young, and my grandson is still at sea. As long as he sails, I am not in the dark." He waited for the footsteps to fade. Then, in the solitude of level 6, the hero of the Marines began to hum. It was a clumsy, off-key tune, a song from a village in the East Blue usually sung by drunks and dreamers. Binks' sake, the sound drifted through the bars, a ghostly melody in the hell of eternal silence, signaling to the world that while the hero was chained, his spirit had finally truly set sail. The sea does not mourn. It swallows the dead, polishes their bones into white coral, and continues to crash against the cliffs with the same indifferent rhythm it has held since the Void Century. But for Monkey D. Luffy waking up on the savage shores of Rusukaina, the sound of the ocean was no longer a call to adventure. It was the sound of a closing door. He awoke not with a scream, but with a gasp, as if he had been drowning in deep water. His body was bandaged, wrapped in the herbs of the Kuja and the care of the law. The physical pain was a dull throb, a distant echo compared to the gaping hole in his chest where his brother used to be. Ace was gone. The Vivre card had burned his hand as it vanished, leaving a scar that no meat or sleep could heal. But as the days bled into one another, a second realization arrived, brought by the Dark King, Silver's Rayleigh. The old legend sat on a piece of driftwood, tossing stones into the surf, his face unreadable. "You are alive, Luffy," Rayleigh said, his voice cutting through the humid jungle air. "Do you understand why?" Luffy gripped the sand, his knuckles white. "Because Ace stopped the punch." "Ace stopped the first punch," Rayleigh corrected gently. "But the second punch, the one that was meant to finish you while you were unconscious, that was stopped by a Marine." Luffy froze. The image of the old man, the giant, laughing, terrifying grandfather who had thrown him into bottomless ravines and tied him to balloons flashed in his mind. He remembered the fist of love. He remembered the coat. "Your grandfather," Rayleigh continued, looking out at the horizon, "killed Admiral Akainu. He shattered the hierarchy of the world to ensure you left that island breathing, and for that sin he now sits in the dark, likely forever." The silence that followed was louder than the beasts of the jungle. Luffy didn't cry. He had no tears left. He felt a sensation that was entirely new to him. Weight. The straw hat on his head, the dream of the Pirate King, the freedom he sought, it all suddenly felt incredibly heavy. Freedom, he realized, was not free. It had been purchased for him. First by the arm of Shanks, then by the life of Ace, and now by the soul of Garp. "Grandpa," Luffy whispered. He touched his chest. The will of D was often spoken of as a storm, a destiny of those who would challenge gods. But sitting there, Luffy understood the true nature of the curse. It wasn't about war. It was about love. The people of D loved so fiercely that they burned the world around them. Garp had loved him enough to become a villain. Luffy stood up. The grief was still there, a stone in his gut. But it hardened. It calcified. He looked at Rayleigh. "I can't go back yet," he said, his voice low but steady. "I'm too weak. If I go now, I'll just be driftwood. I'll just break everyone who tries to save me. He clenched his fist, the rubber stretching tight. I have to be strong enough to never need saving again. I have to be strong enough to break the chains. Miles away, on the other side of the red line, the reconstruction of Marineford was underway. The physical damage was being repaired. Stone masons were filling the crater where Akainu had died, and carpenters were raising new scaffolds. But the spiritual damage was a rot that no carpenter could fix. Kobe walked through the halls of the temporary headquarters, his footsteps echoing in the emptiness. The air felt sterile. With Akainu dead, Aokiji resigned in silent protest of the new draft policies, and Sengoku retired. The Navy was unrecognizable. It was being run by the world government directly now, administered by faceless bureaucrats and the terrifying silent authority of the cipher pole. There was no laughter in the mess halls. There were no crackers being eaten during briefings. There was only efficiency. Cold, brutal efficiency. Kobe stopped in front of the statue of the seagull, the symbol of the Marines. He looked at his hands. He had awakened his observation hockey on that battlefield, hearing the voices of thousands fading out like dying embers. But the loudest silence was the one left by Vice Admiral Garp. "Kobe," a voice said. Helmeppo stood behind him, looking unusually serious. "They're taking down his portraits in the recruitment centers. They're scrubbing Garp's name from the training manuals." Kobe nodded slowly. "They want to erase him. They want to pretend that justice is a machine that never malfunctions." "What do we do?" Helmeppo asked, a tremor in his voice. "If the hero of the Marines was wrong, then what are we?" Kobe closed his eyes. He saw the moment Garp walked off the platform. He saw the man choose humanity over the institution. For years, Kobe had wanted to be an admiral, to be a pillar of the system, but the system was a cage. "We don't become the system," Kobe said, opening his eyes. A new resolve burned there. Not the fiery fanaticism of Akainu, but a quiet, steady light. "Garp showed us that the coat doesn't make the Marine. The heart does. He broke the law to do the right thing." Kobe looked up at the seagull, his small frame seeming to grow in the twilight. "I will become an admiral," Kobe vowed, his voice hardening. "But not their admiral. I won't be a dog of the government. I'm going to find the justice that Garp was looking for, the justice that saves people, even from the Marines themselves." The world turned. The seasons shifted. The 3D2Y message went out to the scattered straw hats. But in this timeline, the message carried a darker, more solemn undertone. It was not just a promise of reunion, it was a declaration of war against fate. Luffy placed his hat on the stone of Rusukaina, bowing his head in the direction of Impel Down. He did not know if his grandfather could feel it, but he sent his haki out, a pulse of raw will rippling across the calm belt. "Wait for me, Grandpa." The sea burned with the light of the setting sun, turning the waves into liquid gold. The driftwoods of the old era were sinking, but from the ashes new ships were being built. Stronger ships. Ships that would not break when they finally crashed against the red line. Time is a cliff face, worn smooth by the relentless crashing of the waves. Years had passed since the fist of grief shattered the plaza at Marineford, and the world had turned over many times in the dark. In the lowest circle of hell, Monkey D. Garp sat in the silence that belongs to the dead and the forgotten. His hair was no longer merely gray. It was the white of sea foam, thin and brittle. His body, once a mountain of muscle that had cornered the Pirate King, was withered. The caloric cost of his strength had finally come due. He was a ruin of a man, a crumbling fortress with the gates left open. But his eyes remained unchanged. They were still the eyes of the storm. Above him, miles upward through the rock and the sea, the world was ending. Or perhaps it was beginning. The vibrations traveled down the spine of Impel Down, tremors of a conflict so vast it made the War of the Best look like a tavern brawl. The world government, the celestial dragons, the ancient throne, it was all shaking. Garp closed his eyes and listened. He did not hear the cannons. He did not hear the screams of dying men. He heard a rhythm. Dum-da-da-da. It was a heartbeat, a drum. a sound he had heard only in the stories of the oldest giants whispered in the shadow of the red line. It was the sound of the sun rising. The heavy steel door of his cell, rusted shut by the salt of years, began to groan. It wasn't being unlocked, it was being warped. The thick metal bent inward, peeling back like the skin of a fruit, yielding to a force that defied the logic of steel and stone. Light flooded the eternal hell. It was not the torchlight of a warden nor the cold glow of a dial. It was pure, blinding white sunlight, impossibly present at the bottom of the ocean. A figure stood in the breach. He was wreathed in white clouds, his hair floating like fire, his silhouette dancing with a joy that felt illegal in this place of sorrow. He did not look like a Yonko. He did not look like a criminal. He looked like a laugh-given form. "Grandpa," the figure said. The voice was not heavy with the grudge of the past. It was light. It was free. Garp looked up. He squinted against the radiance. He saw the straw hat, battered and worn, hanging around the figure's neck. He saw the scar on the chest, the X-shaped reminder of the magma that had almost taken everything. "You're late," Garp grunted, his voice a dry rasp. "I've been bored." Luffy, or the entity that the world now called Joy Boy, stepped into the cell. He didn't break the chains. He simply touched them, and the iron turned to rubber, falling away from Garp's wrists like limp noodles. Behind Luffy, another figure emerged from the light. He wore a marine coat, but it was not draped over his shoulders in the style of the old Admirals. He wore it with his arms in the sleeves, the collar turned up. The word justice was still there, but beneath it, handwritten in black ink, was the word honesty. "Admiral Kobe." "Vice Admiral," Kobe said, snapping a salute. He was crying, tears streaming down a face scarred by battles Garp had never seen. "The Navy. The Navy has turned. We aren't fighting for the dragons anymore. We're fighting for the dawn." Garp looked between them. The Pirate King and the Marine Admiral, the two seeds he had watered with his fists and his love. One represented the ultimate freedom. The other represented the ultimate moral duty. In the old world, they would have been mortal enemies. But here, in the light of the new era, they stood side by side. Garp realized then the true weight of what he had done at Marineford. By killing Akainu, he hadn't just saved Luffy's life. He had destroyed the absolute rigid philosophy that would have forced these two boys to kill each other. He had broken the cycle. He had smashed the machine so that the flowers could grow through the gears. "You didn't come to break me out," Garp wheezed, a smile cracking his weathered face. "I'm too old for your new ship, brat." Luffy grinned, his eyes crescent moons of pure delight. "I didn't come to save you, Grandpa. I came to tell you." "Tell me what?" "That you can eat." Luffy laughed. "The banquet is starting. The whole world is invited." Garp felt a warmth spread through his chest, a sensation he hadn't felt since Roger turned himself in. It was the feeling of a story ending exactly how it was supposed to, the regret that had haunted him. The ghost of Ace finally stopped screaming. Ace was gone, yes, but because Garp had acted, the will of the fire had survived. He looked at his hands, the fists that had leveled mountains. They were trembling, not from weakness, but from peace. "I see," Garp whispered. He slumped back against the cold wall, but the wall no longer felt cold. The sunlight from the boy warmed his bones. "Go," Garp said, closing his eyes. "The sea is waiting for you. Don't let an old relic hold up the sunrise." Luffy hesitated, then nodded. He leaned forward and placed the straw hat, the crown of the era, briefly on Garp's knee. A silent thank you. Acknowledgement that without the fist of grief, there would be no Joy Boy. As they turned to leave, to ascend toward the final battle that would liberate the world, the darkness of the cell tried to creep back in, but it couldn't. The laughter lingered. Garp remained in the dark, but he was no longer a prisoner. He was the anchor that had held the ship steady through the storm, and now the ship had sailed. The chains lay on the floor, rubber and useless. The hero of the Marines took a deep breath. He didn't think of the government, or the law, or the history books. He thought of a jungle in the East Blue. He thought of 3 cups of sake. He thought of a future he would not see, but one he had built with his own 2 hands. Monkey D. Garp threw his head back, and for the last time deep in the belly of the earth, he laughed. It was a boisterous, roaring sound, bwah-ha-ha-ha, that shook the dust from the ceiling. It echoed up the elevator shaft, past the guards, past the gates, rising up to meet the waves. The sea heard it, and the sea remembered his name, even when the world forgot.